Hello, friends of Studio Brule. This is Steve Brule, and this is Coffee Time, where I go over some of the things that come across my desk in the past couple of days. And I have to apologize for last Friday. I lost my internet here in the Dominican Republic and didn't get it back in the apartment until this morning. So that's one of the issues of dealing where I am living right now, and I am moving to a place where I hope we'll have better internet connection. I'll be moving shortly, I hope so. We have Farrell coming on with us today to discuss various issues around boys' issues, and I will probably touch on how the upcoming administration changes might change that or affect the issues of men and boys. Warren has just experienced a few technical difficulties, so as we wait for him to come in, get his issues resolved, I'm just going to go over one small item here that I had on my back burner. And if you see, you can see this now, I think, on the screen. Prime Minister Trudeau calls the Great Reset a conspiracy theory despite advocating for it. I think I tweeted on this earlier that Trudeau had, in fact, used, those very words. Let's just read over this here, a couple of paragraphs from this. Prime Minister Trudeau, and this is on the Post-Millennial. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau provided a stark update on COVID-19 pandemic to Canadians on Friday morning, returning to Rideau College. I don't want to be here this morning. You don't want to be here this morning, Trudeau said. The cases across the country are spiking massively. Trudeau said that the country was really at risk of seeing caseloads go up in hospitals and get overwhelmed and more dying loved ones. And here he says, we need to do everything we can to slow down the spread of COVID-19. If you were planning to see friends this weekend, maybe don't. We are now going to have to really tighten up once again. Now let's get down to the quote where he spoke about the Great Reset. Down here a little bit. Oh, I thought it was closer up. I hope I've got the right article on display here. The Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, he says. Trudeau was asked this morning about growing criticism both online and from the Conservative MPs, including Pierre Poilievre, of Trudeau's use of the term reset when talking about the United Nations. The term coincides with the Great Reset plan pushed by the World Economic Forum, which we talked about on the coffee sessions here. We're in a time of anxiety where people are looking for reasons for things that are happening to them and the difficult moment we're in, said Trudeau. It's nice to be able to try and find someone to blame, something to point to, something to get mad at. I think we're seeing a lot of people, and I'm going to skip down again here. Trudeau has recently slammed by Tucker Carlson for advocating the Great Reset. And he did a press conference using those exact words. Trudeau wants a Great Reset. Will he get it? And yet, okay, I'm not finding the right quote here, but I'm going to save this one for a future coffee session. And I think Warren is ready to join us here today, to join in on the stream. So with no further ado, Warren Ferrell, welcome to Coffee with Steve on Studio Brule.
I'm looking forward to our talk again, Steve. We always have an exciting and interesting back and forth.
Terrific. It's great to have you. And folks in the audience, if you hear of an issue with the audio, please, he says, please turn audio up. Okay, are you talking to Warren or to Steve here? Or to both of us? Please turn the audio up. Let me just see what I can do here in the... Here's some more audio here. Okay, how is this? Folks, let me know in the comments. I got a comment that I was too loud the other day, so I took it off of automatic volume recording control, level controls, and using manual to reduce it down a bit. Okay, Warren.
How can anyone say we have too much of Steve Brule?
Believe it or not, there are people who don't like me.
Former wives, maybe.
I don't know. We don't talk that much. Maybe they love me in secret still.
There we go. That's a good fantasy.
Well, at least I know I've got a lot of feminist enemies, so they're not quiet about it.
the wife loving you in secret is, I think that's a healthy delusional behavior, mindset.
Well, I put that out for comic value. Obviously, I don't believe that in reality. So, Warren, how is things down there in sunny California with all of this crazy election stuff going on? It's turbulent all around, it seems, huh?
It is, and there's a great deal of, I think, anger at President Trump for not acknowledging that he's lost the election, and yet on the other hand, on the conservative side, there are many people, and I just had a conversation with one of the leading conservatives in the country, and he still feels like there's some possibility that some of these that the urban votes were manipulated to some degree, and that will be found out. So far, as we all know, that every single thing that has gone up, been tried in court, has been withdrawn, and so on. So, but the big news is that we're going to be that soon. No matter how long it takes us to accept it, we will have to be dealing with the Biden administration. And the Biden administration is filled not only with Biden, but many people to the left of Biden that really want him to be quite politically correct. And there are a number of hints that he will return to the old Obama edict of starting out with the believing that women who say that they have been a victim of sexual harassment, starting out with believing them, which is not by itself a bad idea. We always want to start out with believing anyone who says they've been hurt in any way, but it's the taking away of the due process rights of men only that is really fundamentally opposite of everything America stands for. It's the opposite of the way that laws were built in civil society since Hammurabi, and the Magna Carta reinforced this. And so we are really in territory where it would be it's pretty unbelievable that a constitutional law professor, Barack Obama, was the person to issue the Dear Colleague letter, in which the universities were threatened from a loss of federal funding if they did not follow the due process regulations, which did not allow, in most cases, a male who was accused to question his accuser, which is fundamental to due process, nor, in many cases, the lawyer to question the accuser. And the fear on the part of universities is much greater than the average person understands, because, for example, Stanford University gets $800 million per year in federal funds. And that the universities were fearing that would be at risk if they found that a woman who said she was a victim of sexual harassment was not found to be a victim of sexual harassment with due process or without. And so there was a double whammy that universities are experiencing. One is the lack of due process, and then the other is that no matter how the outcome really appeared to be after examination, even if the woman was proven to have a reason that she declared that she was a victim of sexual harassment, such as, for example, having another boyfriend and finding that and she gets drunk at night and she's dancing with some guy, and at night when she's drunk she forgets about the other boyfriend, and then she has to have a reason for saying that she was a victim rather than a willing participant. Then only she is allowed to say that she's not responsible, whereas he is held responsible for drinking and having sex with her. And that's really an insult to women, because it suggests that an equal behavior, both of them getting drunk, is that he is responsible and she is not. And that's basically saying a woman is a child and a man is an adult. And that type of thinking reinforces people's disgust with the combination of political correctness and the laws that reinforce that. And I'm afraid that with the Biden administration, we are definitely going to have to be dealing with a lot more of that. And this is not me thinking this alone. This is Biden stating that he will be returning to the to the old Dear Colleague letter, which is what introduces to universities everything that I was just mentioning.
Yeah. It's a very bad turn of events for men, if you ask me, because the Democrats being the feminist party of the U.S. and the feminists being behind most of these changes in policy and law that give undue advantages to women at the expense of men. We're going back to that party with the party that has an enormous amount of pressure behind them to continue further and further down that road. I can't see how this could possibly be good for men in any way, shape, or form, or good for society in any way, shape, or form.
It certainly is going to be very, very, very challenging. And I have written an op-ed piece that that has been turned down by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, the mainstream
Not
media.
surprised at that. I'm not
Yes,
surprised at
exactly.
that.
And the op-ed piece is basically saying, President-elect Biden, you've been saying you want a nation that is healed. Well, you don't start healing a nation by also promising to reverse the executive orders of the previous president. Here we are, a nation with 73 million people having voted for President Trump. Many of them are parents who do not want their children to be bullying and interrupting the way Trump does, but nevertheless felt strongly about the policies that he was advocating and felt that they were not being heard enough to vote for somebody whose personality they disagreed with, but whose principles they basically agreed with and felt that he was articulating what they wanted to have happen. And so you don't start saying that you're healing the nation and then also say you're going to reverse the executive orders that the 73 million people who voted for Trump supported. And so I'm recommending that there be the first act of Biden is that he does a listening tour. He embarks on a listening tour of the reddest of the red states, and he really hears what they say, not for the purpose of explaining to them why he is right and why they are wrong, but for being able to internalize and articulate what people in the red states were so desirous of having heard, that they voted for somebody whose personality they may not have approved of. And the evidence for my saying this, which is probably aware, every conservative is aware of, but the evidence is that that Republicans were elected. More Republicans were elected to Congress than Democrats, which shows that when you get away from the personality of Trump, the Republicans were moving in a positive direction. The Senate's more uncertain, but certainly the House is very clear that this was a divided election where Trump was being voted for less than Republicans in general, and so Democrats who don't hear that are only going to open up the pathway for a greater amount of defeat. And those defeats will continue to come, I predict, until they begin to hear that there's another point of view besides the women good, men bad perspective.
Yeah, and we've been hearing that perspective basically all my life. I've been hearing that perspective. And I don't think we're going to hear less of it under the Biden administration. I mean, this is the guy who...
Definitely agree with you.
Yeah, this is the guy who's behind VAWA. VAWA, probably one of the most destructive acts in terms of male-female relations, because it uses, I believe, the Duluth model, which basically says that exactly what you pointed out there, that men are perpetrators, women are victims, and anything outside of that doesn't exist.
Here is why VAWA is such an enormous missed opportunity. Instead of Violence Against Women Act, there could have been something called a Domestic Violence Act. But here is the challenge that is happening with the Violence Against Women Act. We now have more than 150 studies that show that when married, men and women are about as likely to hit each other. Women, even surveys of the women that are done by women most of the women are feminists, and to feminist scholars' credit, they have found repeatedly, usually they plan to challenge these findings, but they've found repeatedly that even women say they were the first ones to hit their husbands before their husbands hit them. And then the good domestic violence studies, which are about 90% of them, have a 7 levels of conflict. And so so 1 is slapping your partner, 2 is like punching your partner, 3 is hitting your partner with an object, and it goes on up to, of course, the only one that can't be determined is killing your partner. And the killing your partner is by itself very fascinating, and I'll get into that if you ask me about that in a little while. But the both sexes acknowledge that women are slightly more likely to initiate violence at every level. Women on some of the levels are more likely to be hurt, but many times it's not nearly as much differential as it appears, because women are far more likely to hit a husband with an object while he's sleeping. And so there's different ways that they get at that. And so now, when that happens, the woman has massive numbers of shelters in the United States that she can go to. First of all, those shelters are really discrimination against women on one level and discrimination against men on another level. Why should the woman be the one who have to leave when there's a middle of a conflict? Both sexes should have opportunities to leave and places they can leave to. But here is the crime of the Violence Against Women Act. Once the woman gets to the woman's shelter, the shelter tries to persuade her to not return back to that man. The philosophy is, once violent, he will always be violent, and you're just feeding into, so you cannot expect him to change. As opposed to the great missed opportunity, which is having shelters be domestic violence shelters, in which the shelter leaders say, okay, obviously your communication broke down, there's violence that has erupted. Let's see if we can work on your developing communication skills that allow you both to hear each other rather than interrupt each other, rather than escalate, rather than to do the process which we all know leads to domestic violence, which is somebody not being heard and then trying to clarify, and then their clarification being interrupted, and then their clarification being distorted, and then that goes up and up and up until the internal fury gets very high, and both sexes feel extremely vulnerable. And somebody, usually the woman is slightly more than the man, is likely to hit him first, being very exasperated and upset. And then if he hits back, there's then a mutual domestic violence. In most cases where there's domestic violence, it ends up being both partners hitting each other. And then I suggested when I was at the White House, and I suggested to the White House that there be this couples communication work that any couple that went to a shelter dealt with. And so they asked me to talk to Kate Sullivan, who is Katie Sullivan was the former head in Health and Human Services. She was the former head of the entire operation of domestic violence. And she said to me, Warren, I believe in exactly what you are saying. And that is what I tried to bring about. Katie Sullivan is a Trump administration person. And she said, but the entrenched solidness of the feminist perspective on any man who hits you will just hit you again if you go back, and you're just feeding his ability to be violent toward you, and give up on him. That perspective was so deeply entrenched that even though she was the top lawmaker in the country, and she's now with the Department of Justice, even though she's the top lawmaker in the country, she could not penetrate that entrenched phenomenon. Of course, Biden will make sure that perspective remains entrenched if there's no one that gets to him with a better way.
Well, you covered a lot of ground there, Warren. I just want to touch on a couple of things here. One is, I think your are too courteous to the feminists. I honestly don't believe they want to solve the problem. I don't, seriously. They are profiting from and they revel in this idea of being saviors of poor victim women. And so I don't think there's anything in it for feminists to be genuine about solving the problems. The For instance, on a couple of things. For instance, Aaron Pizzey has been talking about this along these lines for 50 years. There's no one who has an excuse to claim, even outside of the specialists in the industry, even people on the street. This information's been out there for 50 years, over and over again, and every time a new study is done or a new article is written to show this, it's completely ignored, and then there's a swamp, a flooding in of information to crush and bury that coming from feminist groups all around the world. So
Well,
I don't think they're honest. I don't think they want a solution. So it's not a
well,
communication breakdown in a sense. It's deliberate, in my view.
I 100% agree with you on the feminist aspect of it. And to sort of reinforce what you're saying, we have to remember that pretty much anyone who makes their living doing something, especially when is usually tied to that way of looking at things. So feminists have they have been able to make a living doing domestic violence work from only the feminist perspective for the last 50 years, but especially the last 30 or 40 years since the Violence Against Women Act has passed. And so they are not going to be the ones to be receptive to that. Secondly, there's no significant, I don't mean to claim that I'm insignificant, but in the larger scheme of things, I am insignificant. So people like myself and yourself and the people that are speaking up on the male side of it are not a significant accumulation of voices to penetrate the feminist structure. Almost all these feminists have moved through gender studies, which is really women's studies, and has not been challenged. That has not been challenged. So they all do, as you said, Steve, they do perceive themselves as saviors of women. And on the surface, that makes common sense until you get down to looking at it more in depth. But even though those studies are done by feminists who have been, and we do have to acknowledge the feminist scholars that came up with different results than feminists that they were part of have said, and that's been the one exception to the rule. But nevertheless, the larger feminist community has just ignored those studies rather than paid attention to them. So we cannot expect changes to occur with any agreement from the feminists. The only thing that can possibly bring about changes is the fear on the Biden administration that if they continue with not hearing boys' issues and men's issues and the importance of fathers, that they are going to be stepping not only into they're going to be stepping into an electorate that is going to increasingly be willing to vote against them, no matter how off-putting the Republican leader can be. And we're seeing that not only, I said before, in the Republican, the House of Representatives increasing in Republicans, but a very high percentage of the state legislatures in the country are increasingly Republican as well. And so, but it may be that the Democrats will have to take 1, 2, 3, or 4 defeats before they learn this lesson.
Yeah, let's hope. I think that what it looks like to me is that the feminists have swung their weight behind the feminist ideology and the feminist machine, which is a huge and powerful machine in the U.S. They are so committed. Their power base is so dependent upon the ideological feminist portion of the U.S. that I don't think they can afford to piss off any of their feminist base.
I think the best thing that we can hope for is, for example, boys' issues and framing boys' issues in a way that helps people understand that there are millions and millions of, I would estimate about 20 million parents who have boys that are really very much in trouble, and that manifest the boy crisis book that I wrote, where I wrote about this, and they're in trouble in major ways, in ways that do not please women. I mean, women want productive men. Women, especially women who are contemplating having children, they want the options to be full-time involved with children, full-time involved with the workplace, or do some combination of both. And they can't have those options if they marry a man who's not being very productive, who's depressed, who's living at home. And so, the great majority of women who wish to have children, they are usually, the great majority of them are heterosexuals. They ideally want a father that can share the burden with them of raising those children, and be a partner with them. But if boys don't do well, girls will not have boys who they feel are worthy of them, to share the parenting process. When boys and girls do not have involved parents, that's what leads to mass shooters. That's what leads to ISIS recruits, and that's why our prisons are filled with fatherless boys. And so we will be paying this enormous price. When I did the calculations for it, when I did the research for the boy crisis, I estimated that conservatively, well over $1 trillion is spent per year on cleaning up the damage from boys who are rudderless, purposeless, and in crisis mode, to say nothing of the mental health expenses of boys dying from overdoses of opioids and other types of medications that they take to deal with their defenses, to say nothing of the suicides. The single biggest predictor of suicide is fatherlessness. And so and being a criminal is fatherlessness. And so that plus 48 other causes of major developmental problems that are very highly related to fatherlessness, or directly caused by fatherlessness. If the Democrats do not understand this and work on this, they're going to, they'll pay the price. They'll just be losing increasingly large numbers of amounts of support around the country.
Well, I certainly agree with your analysis, Warren. The one thing that strikes me in that analysis is that you're assuming that the people that the Democrats are speaking to reason like you reason. And I don't believe they do. I don't believe they do. They're emotional reasoners. Let me give you a couple examples. We've seen a lot of stories of teachers sexual assaulting boys, and what do they get? Barely a slap on the wrist, and nobody's concerned.
Yes.
We saw a case just recently where a mother was charged, convicted of burying her baby and killing it, of course. Yeah. And she got off with probation of 3 years, and it was reduced to 1 year. She's clear on the street with no record now.
Yeah.
Then we've got these hashtags like kill all men, the future is female, I don't need a man, men need to get out of the way, men need to give power to women. I think the feminists have been so successful at convincing women that men are in the way and the problem, that although your analysis is actually closer to the way human beings and human societies really work, feminists have created a fantasy world in the minds of an enormous number of people, with 50 years of non-stop propaganda, non-stop lies, non-stop deceit. I don't know how the feminists are speaking to those people. They're speaking to these ideologically possessed crowd. They're not speaking to a sane, rational group of people.
Steve, if you're talking about feminists and the feminists communicating to other feminists, there's nothing that I could do but 100% agree with you. There's no hope of changing 99 point some odd percentage of, although the woman I'm working here who was working as my assistant was a strong feminist for a while, read The Boy Crisis, read a few other things, and is now changed and is very much in the camp that we're at. Talking about these issues. So, some people do change, and I've certainly met, maybe 30 or 40 feminists out of the few thousand that I know that have made some type of transition. But as somebody who is probably more familiar with the feminist community than just about any other male in the world, this I can 100% agree with you. So the hope is not in feminists. The hope is in some Democratic leaders, potentially, and maybe not Biden, saying that boys are in trouble, and framing that and understanding that parents, the 20 million parents who have boys who are in trouble, care more about their sons than they do about their party label. And if they hear somebody talking about the problems their boys are having that they identify with, that is a huge segment of the population that will have a potential resonance with somebody saying, "My goodness." And here is the reason that that's so important. When a parent right now, with feminist modality dominating, and men having the power according to feminists and women not, the average parent whose boy is having problems feels very lonely and very isolated, and they feel that they must have done something wrong with their son in their parenting process, and they're the problem. When you don't hear that there's a boy crisis and writ large, you feel like you're the problem, as opposed to if somebody is saying, no, 20 million parents are having boys in the United States alone experiencing major problems with boys, largely deriving from lack of father involvement. There are solutions like male teachers and programs to get father warriors, to get young men more involved in becoming fathers and aspiring to become fathers. There are ways of solving this problem. And if they articulate the ways of solving this problem, there's two political hopes. Political hope number one is that the parents of boys will say, I am more inclined to vote for this person who's recognizing the problems my son has, even though I lean Republican. And so I may move into that direction. The feminists are then left in a quandary. They can't vote Republican. They can't vote for Trump or some equivalent thereof. I don't know of any feminist that is a strong feminist that says, I'm going to vote for Trump. And so they're not likely to be lost to the electorate by recognizing and valuing and talking about the boy crisis.
No, I hear you on that. I just one thing came up, and I'll just quiz you on this, and you can respond to this.
Sure.
We know that there are a lot of parents of boys out there. As you say, you're suggesting 20 million. That's quite a lot. We also know that a lot of parents themselves, now, through the indoctrination of feminism and feminist studies in the media, see their boys as part of the problem. They see that their sons acting out, their sons' failures, their sons' whatever, as toxic masculinity. They've been very successful at this, at naming these kinds of fake things in the culture. And I see this regularly on Facebook. Now, this is not study, obviously, but I see this kind of thing regularly. How do I teach my son at 3 years old? There was a Facebook thread and a Twitter thread on this last week, and it had thousands of responses, and the overwhelming majority were along the lines of, how do I teach my son not to become a toxic, evil male? How do I teach my son to be a feminist? And they're talking about boys between 3 and 5 years old. There's a lot of those kind of parents out there too, Warren. They will say, yes, boys are in trouble, and the solution is more and stronger feminism.
Yeah, there is some of that, especially among single mothers. I do know that is often the case, and I think there's two things we have to deal with here. One is, the lack of understanding of things like the differences of what dads bring to the family. So when a father roughhouses, a mother feels like that's really, teaching many mothers feel like, I have only one more child to monitor here with the father roughhousing with the children, and B, you're teaching the children to be rough, and you're teaching the children to hurt each other, and you're teaching the children to have that toxic masculinity, especially the boys. And so there's not an understanding of, when I did the research for the boy crisis, I saw there was about 9 significant differences in the way dad style parenting versus mom style parenting. And one of the things that has not been communicated that can be communicated without having to go directly through the feminist filter, is saying, here are some of here's the connection to empathy that roughhousing has. Here's the statistical connection to why children who roughhouse with their dads, when the dads enforce boundaries of saying, if you push your sister or brother aside, there'll be no more roughhousing. And then the children realize that if they don't think of their sisters or brothers' needs, that is, if they don't have empathy for somebody else besides their own needs, that they will lose their roughhousing. And we as fathers have to start communicating to moms that the things that we do are connected to things that they want for their children. Every mother wants empathy for their children, both boys and girls. But the connection between roughhousing and empathy is very it's very counterintuitive, to say the least. And so we guys have to, we fathers especially, have to do our homework to show how many things that are positive. The boundary enforcement that dads tend to provide much more than moms are things that lead to children having postponed gratification. Postponed gratification is the single biggest predictor of success or failure. But dads are not doing their homework on this, and I can't blame dads either, because you can't find in parenting magazines or books on parenting what the connection is between dad style parenting and the positive characteristics that we all want our children to have. We all want our children to have emotional intelligence. We all want our children to have social skills. We all want our children to have postponed gratification. We all want our children to have discipline. We all want our children to be able to dream, but also have the discipline to fulfill those dreams. All of those things come as a result of father involvement, and specifically as the result of father-style behaviors, of saying, for example, the boy comes home from school and says, I have a teacher that doesn't like me. I want to change classrooms, and it's a big enough school, and mom will be much more likely to say, oh, sweetie, I'm really sorry about that. I don't want you to have a bad experience in 3rd grade, because that could affect you your entire life. I'll go in and talk to the principal about getting you switched to a teacher who likes you. Dad is far more likely to say, well, if I were to meet with your teacher, sweetie, what would your teacher say about you? Well, a teacher says I just always interrupt and shout out. Well, do you? And so maybe we should go in and talk with your teacher about it, and you can be there, and let's have a discussion with you and your teacher. And then the teacher and the child and the mother and the father are able to sort of reach some understanding of what the problem is. But what the dad has just done is encouraged a pattern where the child has, and usually it's the boy child that's acting up and more fidgety, where the boy is able to take responsibility for what he is doing, as opposed to just blaming it on the teacher and getting the principal to solve the problem, which is something the mother is more likely to do. And so we as guys and fathers have to speak up we have to put our focus on why we are of value and how we are of value. And that then addresses all the feminists' focus on toxic masculinity, because if you're talking about children being more empathetic and having more social skills and more postponed gratification, and less likely to be criminals as a result of father involvement, feminists will have a very difficult time putting that down unless they get themselves into deep water.
Again, I can't disagree with what you're saying on that. I think what a lot of your analysis seems to come from the perspective that both parents and, in fact, most of our society is on the same page. In fact, concerned about reasoning things through and creating a good solid, reasoned lifestyle. But I don't see a lot of evidence of that in our culture. Our culture, our culture does everything in its power to tempt women to destroy their marriages. And it does everything in their power to tempt to show women how to use their children as a power tool within marriage and within divorce. And these kinds of forces are enormous. So I'm a little uncomfortable with relying a little bit too much on a presumption of good faith and good intention prevailing over the social, broad cultural pressures that both men and women face in our world. Women are constantly told that they're being cheated by men in our culture. So women are being brought up told that they've been cheated by men throughout of history and that it's their turn now, that they got to get back at it. And they're being given the tools to do that in the courts and through divorce and in business by making a false accusation of impropriety against a competitor for a promotion, for instance, as an example. These kinds of pressures are everywhere in our society. If we didn't have those pressures and we weren't encouraging those kinds of backstabbing behaviors in our culture, I would say, you know, Warren, I'm all on board. I think we're going to get through this and it's going to be a smooth sailing future because people will come to an understanding that we need to work together and we need to reason these things through.
No,
You know?
well, yes, and I think that where we agree and where we're different here is that I agree with you that the great majority of people aren't logical, and although they're logical in certain ways, almost all Americans and most people around the world are filled with cognitive dissonance, and it's an opportunity to sort of. And and if you ask me to predict, you know, what's going to happen, or to disagree with you in any way, shape, or form of how powerful feminist culture has been. The reason I wrote The Myth of Male Power and completely alienated myself from every feminist on the planet.
A brilliant book, a brilliant and one of a kind, game-changing book. Everybody out there should read that book, if no other book. If not one other book on these topics, this is like the one to start with. Sorry to interrupt you there, Warren. That's The Myth of Male Power by Warren Ferrell.
And there's nothing in The Myth of Male Power that I say, and I'm in the process now of reviewing it and revising it. But there's nothing that I say in there that I disagree with, and it is from top to bottom an explanation of the false assumptions of feminists and the opposite of, and I have to say that. My publicist, this Simon and Schuster published it. It was the best publisher in the world, probably, and they set up debates with me with feminists, and Gloria Steinem and other feminists were ready to debate, and they all got together and said no, we don't want to give The Myth of Male Power more publicity, and every single debate that I was set up with was canceled, with the exception of one feminist in a small town. But my going from, as you've heard me say before, my going from 50 speaking engagements at universities per year down to 0 to 1, and losing all the corporate speaking engagements, and losing maybe $12 million by moving over toward explaining what the toxicity of feminism is, and why boys and men need to be heard and understood. I certainly understand the power of feminism, and it is exactly the power of feminism that makes it so important that we find every way, shape, or form of framing the things in such a way that lead to a different perspective being simultaneously seen. That is, somebody saying on the one hand, oh yes, men dominate the world. Well, I'd like to challenge them on that. But if I'm able to appeal to a woman saying, I want the best life possible for my son, I have seen the feminists that I have seen change the most have been feminists that are raising sons, and that they start seeing, when I would say something like, men really have a great amount of fear in taking sexual initiatives with a woman. Well, if they don't have a son, the only thing they can think of is all the times that men took sexual initiatives and didn't take no for an answer, or tried to, quote, ply them, unquote, with drinks, as if they were helpless victims in accepting the drink. And they shouldn't be thanking somebody for paying for the drink. But when they have a boy who's 12 years old, and he's really loves this girl Christy at school, and but he knows that she won't ever give him the time of day. The mother sees a vulnerable son, who's afraid of rejection in a way that she can't imagine when she hears the word man, because man goes right through the feminist filter. Men's rights go right through the feminist filter. What? Men control the world. They have the right to do everything. If they have the right to do everything, why are we talking about men's rights who already have the rights? That's where words like that, like men's rights, that's the filter that it goes through in the 99% of feminist minds and about 80% of non-feminist minds. Whereas, women are mothers of sons, are biologically programmed to protect their children, whereas they're biologically programmed to hear men who are complaining as whining men, and they respond to whining men as men whose fingernails are scratching on the chalkboard of their ears, and they just sort of they fall in love biologically, not with whining men, but with alpha men. And so we can't go through the men's route to move the core of the population. We can go through the boy crisis route to tap into the empathy that mothers begin to develop for males when they're younger, even though they might want their males to be more empathetic than they're inclined to be. But there's ground for minor earthquakes to happen with mothers of sons.
Yeah, I 100% can understand that's a percentage of women see that way. I've only got a few more minutes, and then I do have to go today. I do have another engagement, but I'll just put this comment, and you can respond to that, and then maybe we could call it a day. Do you have any sense of how many women really don't feel that protective of their sons compared to their daughters? Because I have seen a fair bit of this. They will cuddle and soothe their daughters right from a young age, more than their sons even. And you see, when they get older, the mothers will draw the "I'm your mother" card a lot, as if that's supposed to end all discussion and end all conversation. And then you see mothers in the past even guilting their sons, sometimes their underage sons, to go and join the war effort, knowing full well that they may not come back, or they'll come back with missing limbs. Just how deep does this empathy for their own sons go, even their own sons go, in women and mothers?
Well, for both mothers and fathers, there's all of history has taught us to cuddle girls and tell boys don't cry. And the purpose of telling boys don't cry is you didn't want them to be in touch with their feelings, because you were preparing them to be disposable. That was the definition of masculinity, and we reinforce that in thousands of ways. Look at that picture of Uncle Joe from the Marines. He died in war, but he is a real hero. And the boy wants to be a hero. He wants to be respected. He wants to be loved. So he gets and the mother and father, with boys, we have a real tension. We want them to be willing to be saviors of the saviors, and we don't want them to be disposable. But in order to be saviors and be heroes in wars, they have to risk disposability. And so and then if we are getting our son to risk disposability in war, it's more psychologically difficult to attach emotionally to someone who we may lose. And that is the core tension in both mothers and fathers toward boys. There's none of that tension toward girls. We want girls to live. We want girls to. We treasure them. And the feminist movement has made that worse by saying that, well, the boys who succeed by working very hard and going up the ladder corporate wise, or working the hazardous jobs, if they earn more money than females do, that's a proof of men being entitled and men being privileged, as opposed to saying, thank you, men, for giving up the things you would love to do, for recognizing that the road to high pay is a toll road, and that you were willing to pay those tolls when you had children, rather than to be a starving artist or a musician or a writer, and not make enough, or an elementary school teacher and not being able to make enough to support your family. You gave up what you wanted to do what would create benefits for the next generation and benefits for your wife. That is the big missing piece that the feminist movement has perpetrated on us, and that we really need to confront. But we guys, we have to remember, women can't hear what men don't say. When we speak up, we're going to take risks. When early feminists spoke up, they were called lesbians, bra burners. They got the finger. They took those risks. Now we must take the risks of being rejected. I was just thrown off of a major primetime TV show because I was associated with the men's rights movement. That some boss found out. It's going to cost you. It has cost me a lot in money, certainly a lot in exposure, and it will for many generations. But that's probably the biggest single contribution. If you want to contribute to the world, contribute to it by speaking up on behalf of these issues, because we're all in the same family boat, and when only one sex wins, both sexes lose.
Yeah, I can agree with most of what you're saying there. I'm going to just make a couple of comments, and I'll give you a 30-second response. Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like, okay, and first of all, I'll say that when men do speak up today, you're quite familiar with this, I think. They're generally ridiculed, they're demeaned, they're called wussies, they're punished in various different ways, and then they're ultimately told to shut up and listen. It's your job to listen, not to speak up. So I agree with you, and I'm not going to shut up. I mean, a lot of people want me to, but I say to men, speak up anyways, no matter what, because it's a lot of fun speaking up. It's a lot more fun than biting your tongue and being frustrated about it. So do it for that reason, if no other reason.
Yes.
But this is the one I wanted to feed back to you to respond on. It sounds like almost like you're arguing that mothers are even biologically programmed to feel less empathy for even their own boys.
Yes, absolutely. And we have to recognize that we're creatures both of socialization and biology, and those nature and nurture interact with each other. And that's why, in the 1980s, I spoke to a big men's convention, and it was at the time of the mythopoetic movement. And I said, the women's movement was going to make progress very quickly. I would walk into the CEO of the New York Times, and he had no clue about feminist issues. I talked to him for 25 minutes, and he would get all right, I got it. And he did, and lots of things changed quickly. I've been speaking on boys and men's issues for almost a half a century now, and it's not an easy catch on, because we are biologically programmed to protect women and give women what they want. And when the women cry, it is the most powerful force in getting men to respond positively to whatever women want. But the opposite is true for men. When we cry, we're wimps, and we're somebody to be ignored and ridiculed for doing so. But exactly because it is so challenging makes it a challenge of a lifetime, except to have. But just don't expect to be wealthy doing it.
No, that's for sure. But is it rewarding work? Would you pick a different path if you'd had to do it over again, Warren?
No, I wouldn't. I would not pick a different path if I had to do it over again.
There's your answer right there.
And I also will say that if you want to follow this path, do save up some money. Do work at something maybe that's not so meaningful right away, because learn how to invest, learn how to buy homes rather than rent them. Do learn some practical things that will allow you to continue speaking up. If you get married and have children, make sure the woman you marry is a woman who is perfectly fine with earning more money than you are, and that you're secure enough inside to have her earn more money than you are. There's lots of things that you need to go through to be a champion of boys and men, and contradict everything we are biologically programmed to do, but what is necessary for the next stage of our evolution.
Excellent way to wrap up. To thine own self be true. You'll be happiest that way, even if you are a little poorer for it.
Yes. Not a pathway to making money.
No. So, folks, thank you so much for joining me here on Coffee with Steve, and welcoming Warren Farrell. Warren will be back again probably next month, Warren, you think?
Absolutely. Look forward
We're
to
going
it.
to do this on a regular basis and touch base on all of these issues plus more. I hope that we can delve into other issues as well. Folks, I always like to remind everybody, do something you love every single day, because this is your life. It doesn't matter how bad it gets. You still should do something you love every single day. And if you don't have something you love, find something you love and do it every day. And with that, thanks you for joining me on Coffee with Steve. We'll be on, I think, later this week with Janice Fiamengo to finish up the episode that we got interrupted on last Friday. So come back to Coffee with Steve on Studio Brule.
Janice is wonderful.
She's always